Most of us make excuses. I know I make excuses all the time. We say, oh, we can't do this. It was meant for someone else. If everybody says someone else should do the outreach, then none of us will do it. Jonah made excuses. Jonah is another very powerful story found in the book of Jonah. I encourage all of us to read all of that sometime. But Jonah is a prophet, and God's telling him to go and preach to Nineveh, which was one of the most wicked cities at that time. It's like one of us going to Las Vegas and holding an evangelistic series. Once again, close to the impossible. So Jonah says, I'm not going to do this. So he gets on a ship and he runs away from God. Well, what does God do? We all know the story. Events happen and Jonah gets thrown overboard in the storm and God swallows him with a fish. Did God shake Jonah's world? Absolutely. Do we need God to shake our worlds, or are we going to listen to that still small voice? So now that I've talked about what we can do as an individual to evangelize, I'd like to talk about what we can do as a church to evangelize. The first thing I'd like to talk about is small group Bible studies. That is one of the major foundations of the Adventist Church, small group Bible studies. Also, and I will talk about how to do this later in the sermon. Also, we can collectively outreach. We can give out literature as thanks for collecting canned goods for the needy. And in turn, the literature we give to the people will bring them closer to God. Let me explain that a little more clearly. So we go out and collect food for people in need, say for the food bank. And then we give literature to them as thanks. And I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, we need to do this. We already do evangelism. Harmony goes and feeds the homeless. She's very instrumental in that. And she also, with Pastor and others, goes to nursing homes and evangelizes to them. So we can get involved in that. So now that I've talked about what we can do, why does God love us? Why do we love God? I'd like to talk about how we can share God's love to people. Now that we've talked about the what, I'd like to talk about the how. Well, first, it's not external, It's internally. We must commit ourselves to God before we go out and reach out to people. We must gain a relationship with Him and get to know Him. We do this because we can't share about God if we don't know about Him. It's like this. Say I'm at school and my friend Chris, asks me, Preston, have you seen the new television show on Discovery Channel? And I said, no, I haven't seen it. He said, did you see the episode last night? I said, I haven't seen it. He goes, go ahead and describe it. And I say, Chris, I haven't seen it. Go ahead and describe it, Preston. Well, I haven't seen it. It's the same way with God. We can't describe something we haven't seen. At Youth for Jesus, which is a summer program funded by ASI, I was going door to door, and I had a guy ask me about my beliefs. He was asking me questions such as salvation and the cross, stuff I should know as an Adventist. And I had to be on top of my game to answer his questions. Thankfully, I had a friend there who was also grounded in her beliefs, and together we answered the man's questions. But it really shook me to see how much I had to learn about God. Do we think if we were giving Bible studies, it would cause us to study our Bibles more? do we also think that we can draw closer to God by evangelism? Not only does it draw the person we are reaching to God closer to Him, it also brings us closer to Him. Also at YFJ, I had an experience where I was studying for a Bible study that I was preparing to give it. And this Bible study was on Nicodemus. And I was giving it to a lady who was Adventist, but she hadn't been going to church for some health reasons. So I was studying for this Bible study, and what did I do? So I read John 3 about Nicodemus. Then I consulted the Desire of Ages and also my Bible worker. So in the preparation process, it drew me closer to God. Which brings me to my next point. Why would we want to be in heaven with a God we don't know at all? If we know our iPhones and iPads better than God, then something's wrong. Of course, I'm a 15-year-old sophomore growing up in the 21st century, so I know that the iOS 8 is the most recent operating system for iPads and iPhones, and that the MacBook Pro 13-inch with Retina display is one of the most powerful personal computers out there, and that the Mac Pro can be updated to 12 cores of power. But if I know more about things the world has to offer, if I know more about that than God, then something's wrong. So the bottom line is, before we evangelize, we need to know God. How do we do this? We do this by spending time with Him every day in prayer and throughout His Word. So now that we know we need to have a relationship with God, do we think it's also necessary to give up the things we put in front of God before we go out and reach out to people? Should we place a challenge of 30 activities that brings us closer to God rather than having 30 obstacles between us and God? My dad always told me stories about evangelists who would come to his town. He told me this one particular evangelist in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the guy would get up there and say, "You might die driving home tonight. Will you be saved?" And then he would go and start ripping people out of their chairs to come and follow Christ. He was half right. The part he was wrong about was we are not going to die driving home today. And most likely we won't die tomorrow. But he was right that the end is near. And that's all the more reason that we should be thinking about what we want to spend our life doing. Do we want to spend our time with things we put in front of God? Or should we put God first and focus on Him with our lives? So talk about focusing on God. What are the actions we want to exhibit that show we focus on Him? Well, I can name one thing that encompasses most Christians today. We sit in a pew. That's it. Good Christians sit in a pew other times than Christmas and Easter. But I think Adventism is a little different. I believe Adventists are active in outreach. So now that I've talked about how we as an individual can share God's love with others, I want to talk about how we can as a church. Well, I mentioned earlier, small group Bible studies. And so you're thinking, Preston, how do we do that? Well, we host multiple Bible studies in people's homes and have Hampton Roads divided up into segments. So each segment goes to one person's home.